They say a man learns who he is in the cold, not the easy cold of a morning you can walk back from. The other kind. The kind that gets into the marrow and starts whispering that it would be simpler to lie down. I was 51 years old the winter I found her, and I had already made my peace with dying alone on that mountain. I had a tin of buttons on my mantle, one for every person the world had taken from me, and I figured someday somebody would find my body and not know what the buttons meant, and that would be the whole sum of my life. A stranger's confusion over a rusty tin. Then the blizzard came, and in the white of it, half buried, there was a shape that shouldn't have been alive. I want to tell you I carried her home because I was a good man. I wasn't sure I was. I carried her home because something older than me made the choice, and by the time I understood what I'd done, it was already too late to undo. Fate doesn't ask permission. It just leaves things in your path and waits to see what you're made of. This is the story of the winter, I found out. The wind had a voice that night, and the voice was lying to me. That's the first thing you learn on high ground in a real storm. The wind will tell you all manner of things. It'll tell you the fence line is closer than it is. It'll tell you the light in your own window is the light in some other man's. It'll tell you to sit down, just for a spell, just to catch your breath, and then it'll cover you over like a mother pulling a blanket up on a child, and in the morning you'll be a lump of white nobody thinks to dig at until spring. I knew the wind's tricks. I'd buried enough men who hadn't. So when it started telling me there was something out past the dead cottonwood, something that didn't belong, I told it to go to hell and kept walking. I had 2 heifers unaccounted for, and a lantern already guttering low, and I was in no mood to be led off a cliff by a draft with opinions. But the shape didn't move like snow moves. Snow drifts. It builds in long, soft ridges, and it shifts when the gusts hit it, and it never, not once in all my years, humps up in the middle like a back trying to rise. I stopped. The lantern threw a circle maybe 8 feet wide, and everything past it was a churning gray nothing. My breath came out and froze on my beard, and I stood there arguing with myself, which is a thing I do, being a man who spent too many winters with only his own company for conversation. Walk on, Rourke, it's a rock, it's a dead calf, it's nothing. But I've learned the hard way that the things you walk on from are the things that walk with you the rest of your life. I've got a tin full of buttons that could tell you all about it. I went toward the shape. 10 steps and the cold hit a new gear, the kind that makes your teeth ache down in the roots, and I got close enough to see it wasn't a rock. It was a person, curled on their side, knees drawn up, one arm flung out as though they'd been reaching for something when the reaching stopped. Snow had already claimed the lower half. Another hour and the mountain would have had them entire. I dropped to my knees, set the lantern down where the wind couldn't take it, and started digging with my hands, and my hands weren't good for much anymore. Knuckles swollen like walnuts, 2 fingers on the left that never bent right since a horse rolled on them in '74, but they dug. A woman. Young, dark hair frozen into ropes across her face. She wore a wool blanket coat gone stiff as tin and moccasins soaked through, and I knew from the cut of her clothes and the deerskin at her wrists before I knew anything else about her that she was Apache. Chiricahua, most likely, this being their country long before it was ever called mine. None of that mattered right then. What mattered was whether she was still breathing, and for a long, terrible moment I couldn't tell. I put my ear down near her mouth. Nothing. Put 2 fingers to the side of her throat where you feel for it, and my own hands were so cold I couldn't trust what they told me. I waited. The wind screamed. And then there, the smallest flutter against my fingertips, slow as a clock winding down, but there. Alive, barely, and getting less so by the minute. I want to be honest with you, because this is a story about a decision, and a decision only means something if you understand the shape of it. There was a version of that moment where I stood up and walked away. I'm not proud of it, but it lived in me, the calculation. She was near dead already. The homestead was 3/4 of a mile back through a storm that was already thinking hard about killing me too. I was 51 and my heart wasn't the machine it used to be, and I'd felt it stutter climbing the hill that morning. A younger man might carry her. A wiser one might not try. And there was another thought under all that, uglier. One I'll set down here because pretending I'm better than I am would insult you. She's not your people. Whatever brought her out here in this, it's not your trouble to die for. I knelt there in the snow and I held both those thoughts, the walking away and the carrying, and I felt the cold starting to slow my own blood down. Then she made a sound. Not a word, just a small broken exhale, the kind a body makes when it's dreaming its last dream, and something in it. I can't explain this to you. Something in it reached into my chest and closed around the one soft place I had left. I've heard 100 sounds a dying thing makes. I've made that sound easier than you'd think some nights. I got my arms under her. Lord, she was heavier than she looked, the way the unconscious always are, dead weight and wet wool besides, and I remember thinking with a strange calm, this is how it ends then. 2 of us in the snow instead of 1. I got her up across my shoulders in a carry, a man learns hauling feed, and I stood, and my knees screamed, and my back sent a bolt of lightning straight up into my skull, and I nearly went down. But I didn't go down. I got the lantern hooked in 2 fingers, and I turned into the wind, and I started walking. Now I could tell you that walk was noble. It wasn't. It was the ugliest, meanest, most stubborn thing I ever did, and there was nothing fine about it. The wind had swung round to meet me, of course it had, because the wind is a spiteful thing and it knew what I was trying to do. Every step it shoved. The snow came sideways and found every gap in my coat. The woman's weight ground my spine down with each footfall, and my breath came in wet, ragged tears that froze the second they left me. I counted steps. It's a thing I do, I count. Buttons in the tin, fence posts, the days since I've said a word out loud to another living soul. Counting keeps the wind from getting a word in edgewise. 1, 2, 3. The cottonwood should be 50, 51. Where's the cottonwood? I couldn't find the cottonwood. That's when the fear came, and it came cold and clear the way real fear does. Not the fluttery kind, but the kind that's just a fact. I was off my line. In a whiteout, a man can walk a perfect circle and swear on his mother he's walking straight, and I'd been so fixed on not dropping her that I'd let the wind turn me. I stopped. I stood there with a dying stranger on my shoulders and no earthly idea which way was home, and the lantern chose that moment to gutter down to a bead of blue and go out. Full dark. I have never in my life been so alone as I was in that dark, and I have specialized in being alone. I'll tell you what saved us, and it wasn't courage. It was a mule named Pilgrim and a habit I'd cursed myself for 100 times. See, I keep a bell on the porch post. A stupid sentimental thing. My wife hung it there, Martha, going on 19 years dead now, and every fall I tell myself I'll take it down because the sound of it in the wind is like a hand on an old bruise, and every fall I leave it. And that night, faint under the storm's roar, so faint I thought I'd imagined it, a bell. This way. I turned toward it, lost it, turned again and found it and lost it, and that walk became a thing I did entirely by ear, staggering blind toward a dead woman's bell with a dying woman on my back. And if you'd asked me in that moment whether I believed in fate, I'd have laughed blood at you. But I'll tell you now, older and quieter, I've stopped being so sure. Martha hung that bell. Martha never met the girl on my shoulders, and Martha's bell is the only reason either of us saw morning. The porch rail hit me across the shins before I saw the house. I nearly wept. Getting her inside was its own small war. I couldn't feel my hands to work the latch. I finally just fell against the door and let my weight do it, and we tumbled through together onto the plank floor, and the sudden absence of wind was so total it rang in my ears like a struck pot. The fire was down to coals. I laid her by the hearth and threw on kindling with hands that wouldn't obey, blowing on the coals till my head swam, and slow, too slow, a flame caught. In the firelight, I got my first real look at her. She was younger than I'd thought, 20, maybe less. There was a hardness to her face, even unconscious, a set to the jaw that made me think of a person who'd learned to expect the worst and had stopped being surprised by it. Frost had scalded her cheeks white in patches, and her lips had gone a color lips shouldn't be, and there was blood. Not from the cold. Old blood, dried dark, soaked through the left side of her coat down low near the hip, and when I peeled the frozen wool back carefully, feeling like a trespasser in every inch of it, I found the wound. She'd been shot. Days ago, from the look of it. The bullet had gone in, and I couldn't tell if it had come out. The flesh around it was angry and hot even against my cold fingers, which meant fever, which meant infection, which meant she'd been dying of two different things at once out there in the snow and had chosen, apparently, to keep walking anyway. I sat back on my heels and looked at this half-frozen, shot-through girl on my floor, and a whole new set of questions opened up in front of me like a pit. Who shoots a young woman and leaves her to walk into a blizzard? And what kind of trouble had I just carried across my own threshold and shut the door on? I did what I knew. It wasn't much, but Martha had been a healer of sorts, and some of it had stuck to me the way things stick when you love the person teaching you. I got the wet clothes off her, and I'll say this plain because I know how it might sit, and I want it sat right. I did it the way you'd tend a wounded animal or a child, with my eyes on the work and nothing else in my head, because a body freezing to death doesn't leave room for any other kind of thought. I wrapped her in every blanket I owned and 2 of Martha's old quilts besides. I heated stones in the fire and packed them close around her. I cleaned the wound as best I could with whiskey and boiled cloth, and she never woke, only made small sounds, and once said a word in her own tongue that I didn't understand and never would, though I've turned it over 1,000 times since. Then there was nothing to do but wait and feed the fire and watch her breathe. I sat up the whole of that night in Martha's rocker with a rifle across my knees, not for her, understand, for whoever had put that hole in her, because a wound like that has a history, and history has a way of following its people up a mountain. Somewhere past midnight the storm hit its worst, the whole cabin shuddering with it, snow packing against the north wall till I could hear it groan. And I got to thinking, the way a man does in the deep of a bad night, about the buttons. There's a tin on my mantel, old tobacco tin, the paint worn off. Inside it are buttons, a button for Martha, cut from her Sunday dress, a button for each of my 2 boys, gone in the same fever that took half the valley in '68, so small I have to hold them close to the fire to see them, a button for my brother, killed at Antietam, that I've never been able to look at straight, a button for my father, buttons for men I rode with, men I fought beside, men I fought against and grieved anyway. A whole small tin of everyone the world ever pried loose from my hands. I keep thinking someday somebody will find it and not understand. I looked at the girl by my fire, and I looked at the tin on my mantel, and I had a thought that scared me worse than the storm. I don't have a button for her yet, and I don't want one. I hadn't wanted anything, not really, in 19 years. Wanting is how they get you. You want something and then it can be taken, and I'd had enough taken to fill a tin, and somewhere along the way I'd made a quiet bargain with myself to stop wanting altogether. Safer that way. Emptier but safer. And here was this stranger, this shot-through Apache girl the storm had dropped in my path like a coin, and already, one night in, I could feel the old dangerous machinery of wanting starting to turn over. Wanting her to live, just that. Just wanting her to open her eyes and prove the mountain didn't get her. I told myself it was only decency. A man wants any dying thing to live. I was lying to myself, and I half knew it, and I fed the fire and waited for dawn. Dawn came gray and grudging. The storm had blown itself down to a hard, steady fall, and the world outside was erased. No fence, no trees, no line between ground and sky, just white. We were snowed in. However much trouble was coming for the girl, it wasn't coming today. The mountain had sealed us both in together, her and me and the fire and the buttons, and there was nothing to do about it. She woke a little before noon. I knew it before I saw it, the way you know when a sleeping animal's gone alert, a change in the breathing, a tightening. I was at the stove with my back half to her, and every muscle in me said she's awake, and she's afraid, and she's deciding whether you're a thing that needs killing. I didn't turn around fast. I've learned that much about frightened things. I kept my hands where she could see them, kept my back easy, and I said, in a voice I hadn't used in so long it came out rusty, "You're safe. I'm not going to hurt you." Whether she understood the words, I don't know. But she understood the tone, maybe, or the hands, because when I finally did turn slow, she was watching me with two of the darkest, most cornered eyes I'd ever seen. And she hadn't gone for the knife I could see her fingers had found under the blanket, the little bone-handled thing I'd left in her reach on purpose, because I figured a person wakes better knowing they're not helpless. We looked at each other a long moment across that cabin, two strangers, two peoples that had spent a generation killing each other across this very ground, a shot-through girl and a 51-year-old man with a tin of the dead on his mantle. She spoke, a few words low in Apache. I shook my head to show I didn't have them. She tried again, English this time, cracked and careful, an accent under it but the words plain enough, and what she said stopped my heart for a beat. She said, "Are you one of them?" I didn't know who them was, but I knew from the way she said it, flat, ready, a person asking a question they've already been betrayed by the answer to before, that everything after this depended on how I answered, and that I didn't yet know enough to answer true. "No," I said, because it was the only thing I could give her that was whole. "I don't know who they are, but I'm not them." She studied me, her hand stayed on the knife. And outside, faint under the falling snow, so faint I might have dreamed it, I've told myself since, I might have dreamed the whole thing, I thought I heard, far down the mountain, the sound of a horse. One horse where there should have been none, on a day no sane man would ride. The girl heard it too. I saw it hit her. I saw every ounce of the little strength she had left pour into her face and turn it to stone. "They're coming," she said. And that was the end of the easy part. That's the thing about fear on a mountain. It plays the same trick the wind does. We sat frozen, the girl and I, both of us listening so hard the silence got a texture to it, and the sound didn't come again. Just snow and the fire and the long, slow tick of the cabin settling under its white weight. Whoever it was had turned back, or hadn't been there at all, or was waiting the storm out same as us, somewhere down below, patient as a wolf outside a lambing pen. But something had changed in the room. The girl had shown me her fear, and a person who shows you their fear has handed you a piece of themselves whether they meant to or not, and we both knew it. The knife came out from under the blanket and rested on top of it now, in plain sight, not put away, but not hidden either. A small honesty. I've thought since that it was the first real thing that passed between us. I made broth. It's about all I'm good for cooking-wise, but broth is what a fevered body can take. And I had a hen's worth of bones going and some dried wild onion. And I ladled it into Martha's good bowl and set it on the floor within her reach and then backed off to give her room, because I'd have wanted the room. She looked at the bowl a long time before she touched it, testing it, maybe, for poison, or just too proud to be seen wanting it. When she finally drank, she drank the way a person drinks who's forgotten the last time they ate, and I turned away to the fire so she wouldn't have to be watched doing it. "What do I call you?" I said to the flames, not to her, so she could answer or not. "Quiet then, Nata," a pause. "It means the one who waits. My grandmother named me. She said I was born impatient and the name would teach me the other thing. A sound that might have been a laugh if she'd had the strength for it. It never worked." "Rurk," I said. "Elias Rurk. Nobody's called me Elias since my wife died, just Rurk." "Your wife is dead." 19 years. She was quiet a moment. Then unexpectedly, gently, the bell on your doorpost, that was hers. I don't know how she knew that. She'd been unconscious coming in. Maybe she'd surfaced enough in the night to hear it, or maybe she just understood that a hard old man doesn't hang a bell for himself. Either way, it went through me like a blade that she'd seen it, and I had to work at my breath a second before I could answer. It was, I said. And that was the whole of it, that first afternoon. 2 names and a bell and a bowl of broth. But you build a bridge one board at a time, or you don't build it at all. The snow fell 3 days. I'll spare you the hour by hour of it, because that's not where the story lives. What I'll tell you is that in those 3 days, 2 people who had every reason in the world to distrust each other learned, board by board, to be in a room together. And it was the hardest and best thing I'd done in 20 years. She was ferocious about her independence. Wouldn't be helped up, wouldn't be helped down, wouldn't take a hand she could refuse. The wound had her fevered and weak, and it cost her, plainly, to do the smallest thing for herself. But she did it, gritting through it, and I learned quick to look away and let her, because to watch was to shame her, and she'd had enough shame off men like me, I gathered, to last her 3 lifetimes. That was the thing that came out slow, over those 3 days, in pieces she let fall when the fever loosened her tongue, or when the dark made confessing easier. She'd been at a place, a school, the government kind, the kind they took Apache children to, far from home, to make them into something the government could live beside. She said the word school the way you'd say the name of a sickness. They'd cut her hair when she came, she said. Years ago she'd been a girl and she'd never forgiven the scissors. They took the language out of your mouth with a strap. They took the name your grandmother gave you and hung a Christian one on you like a tag on a steer. And some of them, she went very still telling this part, very flat, and I understood the flatness was the only way she could hold it. Some of them took more than that, in the dark, from girls too far from anyone who'd ever believed them. The shot in her hip had come from running. She'd finally run, her and 2 other girls, and a man had come after them, a man whose job it was to bring runaways back, and he'd fired to stop them the way you'd fire to stop cattle breaking a fence, not caring over much whether stopping meant killing. The other 2 had scattered. She didn't know where they were. She'd gone up into the high country, toward the only home she had left in her memory, a place her people had wintered when she was small, days from here still, and the wound had slowed her, and the storm had caught her, and I'd found her in the snow. That was the them she'd asked about. Not soldiers, not warriors, a man with papers and a rifle who worked for a school, coming to drag a grown woman back to a place that had spent years hollowing her out. I sat with all that a long time. It rearranged something in me. Because I'll confess to you, I'd had my notions, same as any man of my time and place. I'd fought Apache. I'd lost friends to them, and they'd lost more to us, and I'd told myself the tidy lies a man tells to keep from having to look straight at what a war really is. And here was this girl, and there was not one thing tidy about her. She was just a person who'd been hurt past what a person should have to carry, and who'd kept walking anyway, up a mountain, into a blizzard on a shot hip, because stopping meant going back. Endurance. I've used the word before, and it's the wrong one, too small. What she had wasn't endurance. It was something closer to spite made holy, a refusal so total it had become its own kind of prayer. You will not have me back. I would rather feed the mountain. I'd made a bargain 19 years back to stop wanting anything. I broke it a little more each of those 3 days, and I let myself. On the second night the fever crested and near took her. She burned. I sat up with her wringing snowmelt through cloths and laying them on her, changing them as fast as her skin turned them warm, and she raved in Apache mostly, sometimes English, arguing with people who weren't there, saying no and no and no in a small girl's voice that didn't match her hard-grown face, and I understood I was hearing the school, hearing the child she'd been, and there was nothing I could do but be a body in the room that meant her no harm, which maybe she'd never had, and I stayed. Somewhere in the worst of it, she grabbed my hand. Not knowing it was mine, I think. Just grabbing for something to hold to keep from going under, the way a drowning thing does. And she held it, this ferocious, independent girl who wouldn't let me help her sit up. She held my old ruined hand like it was the last rope on a cliff, all through the darkest hours, and I let her. And I didn't move though my arm went dead and my back howled, because some things a man doesn't move for. Toward dawn the fever broke. She let go of my hand as she came back to herself, quick, embarrassed, and neither of us ever spoke of it. But something had passed. You can't drown holding a person's hand and come back a stranger to them. It doesn't work that way. I lanced the wound that morning and drew out a piece of the bullet that had been feeding the fever. And after that she started, slow, to mend. I want to tell you about the button, because it's where the thing turned. On the third day, the snow easing, she was strong enough to sit up against the wall and take an interest in the room, and her eyes went, of course they did, to the tin on the mantel. She asked what it was. I didn't answer at first. It wasn't a thing I talked about. Wasn't a thing I could talk about. I'd never once said it out loud, that the tin was full of the dead. But she'd shown me her fear, and she'd told me the school, and it seemed a poor kind of cowardice to hold my own tin closed when she'd opened everything she had. So I took it down. And I sat on the floor near her, not too near, and I opened it, and I told her. This one's Martha's. These small two are my boys. This is my brother who I couldn't save. These are men I rode with. This one I've never been able to look at. She listened without a word. And when I was done, she reached out slow, asking permission with her eyes, and she picked up one of my boy's buttons, the smaller one, and she held it up to the firelight the way I do to see it, and she was quiet a long moment. Then she said, "In my language we do not say the names of the dead. To keep them near, we have other ways." She turned the tiny button in her fingers. "You keep them in a box you can hold. That is," she searched for it, "that is a good way. I did not think a man like you would have a good way." A man like you. She meant a white man. She meant a man who'd fought her people. She meant the whole weight of everything between us, said plain and without cruelty, just as a fact she was setting down so we could both see it. "I did a lot of things a man like me does," I said. "I'm not going to sit here and tell you I didn't." "No," she agreed, "you are not." And she set the button back in the tin, gentle in its place, and closed the lid. And that was somehow the kindest thing anyone had done to me in 19 years, that she'd held one of my dead and then given him carefully back. I had my thought again, the one from the first night. I don't have a button for her. I don't want one. But now there was a second thought riding under it, and this one was worse because it was true. If they take her back, I'll need one. That's when the decision came into the room, and once it was there, it never left. The snow was going to stop. It couldn't fall forever. And when it stopped, the tracks would clear, and the man with the papers and the rifle would come up the mountain, because a man like that doesn't quit. Quitting's not what they pay him for. He'd come, and he'd find my cabin, the only cabin on this whole white shoulder of the mountain, and he'd ask his questions. And I would have to decide what to do with the truth. I could give her up. Understand that this was a real option, a legal one, the correct one by every law and paper the country I lived in recognized. She was a runaway from a federal institution. Hiding her was a crime. Lying about her was a crime. A man who did those things could lose everything, his land, his name, his neck maybe, and for what? A stranger, a girl not of his people, a ghost the storm had left on his doorstep. Or I could lie. I could send the man with the rifle back down the mountain empty. And then I could do the other thing, the thing that had been forming in me for 3 days and that I hadn't let myself look at straight. I could take her the rest of the way. To the wintering ground, days off in the high snow on a bad heart. Get her home, to the only home she had. And likely die doing it. 51 years old, a heart that stuttered on hills, days of hard high country travel in the teeth of winter. The odds weren't good. I'd buried enough men to know exactly how not good they were. I sat with the tin in my lap that night and I did the arithmetic a coward does, the kind that lets you off. You already saved her life. You've done your decent part. No one could ask more. Send the man back empty if you like, but don't go and die on a mountain for a girl you've known 4 days. And then I looked at her, asleep by my fire, her hard face gone soft the way even the hardest faces go in sleep, one hand near the little bone knife. Mending, alive, alive because of a bell my dead wife hung and a choice I'd made in the snow. And I understood something that has stayed with me every day since. I'd stopped wanting things 19 years ago, so nothing could be taken. But I'd had it backward the whole time. The taking isn't the tragedy. The taking's just the price. The tragedy is a man who gets to the end of his life with a tin full of buttons, and not one of them earned by a love he'd have died for. Martha's button, my boys. Those I'd have died for, and did a little every day since. But I'd let 19 years go by adding nobody new to the tin, because I'd been too afraid of the button to risk the love. And here was the mountain, offering me one more. I closed the tin, I set it on the mantel. And I made my decision, and I'll tell you what it was, but not yet, because in the morning the snow stopped falling, and by noon there were tracks in it coming up the mountain. One horse, steady and unhurried, a man in no rush at all. The way a man rides when he's certain of the end of the road. I took the rifle down, and I sat where I could see the door. Nada awoke and saw me sitting there and saw the tracks through the window, and she didn't cry out or scramble. She just looked at me, a long, level, terrible look, a person who has been betrayed by every promise ever made to her, asking one more man to be different, and she said, very quiet, "You can give me to him. It is what your law says. I will not fight you. I am too tired to fight you." A breath. "Just tell me now, so I know which kind you are before he gets here." And I sat there with my dead wife's bell hanging silent on the doorpost, and my dead boys in a tin on the mantel, and a rifle across my knees, and I opened my mouth to tell her which kind of man I was. "I'm the kind that's going to lie to him," I said. I watched it land on her. I watched a thing move behind her eyes that I don't have a good word for. It wasn't relief. Exactly, it was older and more careful than relief. The look of a person who has hoped so many times and been broken so many times that they've forgotten how to let hope all the way in. She didn't thank me. I'm glad she didn't. Thanks would have been too small. "Get in the root cellar," I said. "Under the floor by the bed, take the knife. If it goes wrong, if you hear shooting, you come up and you run and you don't look back for me. You understand? You don't look back." "You are not a fast liar," she said, moving already, low and quick despite the wound. "I have watched you for 4 days. You are a very honest man. He will see it." "Then I'll have to be honest about a lie," I said. "Go." She went down through the trap in the floor, and I dropped the rug over it and set the bed leg on the edge of it, and had just got back to the rocker when the horse came into the yard. The man's name I never learned, and I've never wanted it. He was younger than me, well-fed, with a good coat and a repeating rifle in a saddle scabbard, and the easy manner of a man who's used to people being afraid of him and has stopped noticing they are. He had papers in a leather wallet. He showed them to me like they explained him. Maybe he thought they did. He was looking, he said, for a runaway, an Indian woman wounded from the school down the valley. Dangerous, he said, which was a lie so pure I almost admired it. That girl in my cellar, dangerous, 110 pounds of shot through spite. He'd tracked her this direction before the storm. Had I seen anything? And here is the thing about lying, the thing Nada had put her finger on. I'm no good at it. Never have been. My face gives me away. Martha used to say she never needed to ask if I'd been at the pie. My face confessed before my mouth could. So I didn't lie with my face. I lied with the truth, which is the only kind of lie an honest man can carry off. "I found a body in the snow," I said, "and it wasn't a lie I had. 3 days back out past the dead cottonwood, froze solid, couldn't have been out there but a night." His eyes sharpened. A woman. Couldn't rightly tell, I said. Truth again, I hadn't been able to tell those first seconds digging. Snowed had it a while. I didn't have the strength to haul it in, my heart being what it is, so I said what words I had over it and left it for spring. I looked him in the eye, and everything I said was true, every word just aimed wrong. You want to go find it, you're welcome. It's a mile out past the cottonwood under this new fall by now. You'll be digging blind and the storm's coming back by dark. I let that sit. Or you can take my word, a person that's froze 3 days isn't running from anybody anymore. I watched him weigh it. I watched him weigh a mile of digging in deep snow with more weather coming against the word of a broke-down old rancher whose face, he was reading my face, I could feel it, whose face was doing exactly what a grieving decent man's face does when he's telling you about a corpse he couldn't bury. Which was all true. I had found a body-shaped thing in the snow. It just happened to be breathing in my cellar. You bury a lot of strays up here, he said. Mister, I said, and I let him see the tin on the mantel, let his eyes go to it and not understand it. I've buried more than my share. It's about the only thing this mountain's ever given me steady work at. He looked at the tin. He looked at me. He looked at the weather building black over the ridge. And he decided I wasn't worth the mile. If she turns up, he said, swinging back into the saddle, there's money in it. I'll know where to send word, I said, which was the one clean lie I told him, and I told it to his back, and I've never lost a wink over it. He rode down the mountain, and the falling snow took him, and I stood on my porch under Martha's silent bell until I couldn't hear the horse any more, and then a while longer, and then I went in and moved the bed leg and lifted the trap, and Nada came up out of the dark with the knife still in her hand and her face wet, and neither of us said one word about the wet. We left 2 days later. She wasn't strong enough. I knew it and she knew it, and we went anyway, because the man might think better of it and come back with help, and because a hidden thing wants to move while it can. I loaded Pilgrim the mule with what we'd need, and I saddled my old gelding, Job, and I put Nada up on Job because she couldn't walk it, and I walked, leading them both up into the high country where her people used to winter, days off, in the snow. I won't pretend it wasn't hard. It was the hardest thing my body ever did, and my body had done some things. My heart stuttered on the climbs, and I'd have to stop and stand with my hand on Job's flank and wait for it to remember its business, and Nada would watch me from the saddle and not say anything, because she understood by then that offering to walk so I could ride would be an insult, the same way I'd understood not to watch her struggle up off the floor. We'd learned each other. We moved like people who'd learned each other. Nights we made what shelter we could and shared what heat we had, backs to a fire, and she told me about the wintering ground, a valley, she said, with a hot spring in it that never froze, where her people had gone in the bad months for longer than anyone could count, where she'd been a small girl once before the school, where her grandmother was buried. She thought there might be people there. There might not. She didn't know what she'd find. She only knew it was the one place on the earth that had ever been simply, wholly hers, before anyone came to make her into something else, and she was going to reach it or die pointing at it. And if there's no one there, I asked her one of those nights. She looked into the fire a long time. Then I will be home alone, she said, which is more than I have been in a long while. I thought about the tin on my mantle. I thought about 19 years of being home alone, and how it wasn't home at all, just a place I hadn't died yet. I know a little about that, I said. I know you do, she said. It is why I let you carry me. I'm going to tell you how it ended, and then I'm going to stop before the end, because Nada taught me that too, that you don't say the last thing, that you leave a little of it for the quiet to hold. We reached the valley on the 6th day. There was a hot spring in it, just as she'd said, steaming in the cold like the mountain was breathing, the only unfrozen water in a white world. And there were people. Not many, a handful, an old man and some women and children and 2 young men, the ragged edge of a band that had slipped the reservation and the school and the soldiers the same as she had, come home to the one valley to do their dying free if it came to dying. When they saw her on my gelding, they came out into the snow, and there was a woman among them who cried out and ran. And I gathered from the way they held each other that they'd thought her dead, or worse than dead, back at the school, and here she was. They looked at me the way you'd expect, a white man leading their daughter up out of the snow. There was a long moment where I did not know which way it would break, and my hand was not near the rifle because I'd decided somewhere on that mountain that if it broke wrong, I'd let it, because I'd rather they had the choice than I have the rifle. Nada spoke to them, fast in her tongue, more words than I'd heard from her in 6 days. I didn't understand a one. But I watched their faces change as she talked, watched them turn from me and to me, watched the old man's hard face do something I can only call settling, and when she was done, the old man came to me through the snow and stood in front of me and looked up into my face a long time. Then he took something from around his own neck, a small thing, a carved bit of bone on a thong worn smooth with years of a thumb, and he held it out to me. I understood. God help me, I understood exactly, though not a word of language passed between us. He was giving me a button for my tin. He was giving me one of his dead to keep, so I'd have carried something of theirs the way I'd carried her. I took it, I couldn't speak. I took it and I closed my old ruined hand around it and I bowed my head, and that was all, and it was everything. I didn't stay. You'll want me to have stayed, maybe. I didn't. It wasn't my valley and they weren't my people, and a man knows the difference between a home he's welcome in and a home that's his. I stayed one night by their fire, and in the morning I loaded Pilgrim to go back down. Nada walked me to the edge of the valley. She was still weak, but she walked it, upright, refusing the arm I didn't offer because I'd learned. We stood at the place where the valley gave onto the long white slope down, and neither of us was any good at this kind of thing, saying goodbye. We were both of us hard people who'd had too much taken to be easy about the losing of anything. You will die going down alone, she said, flat. It wasn't a plea. It was Nada saying the true hard thing because that's what she did. I might, I said, but I made it up. Man that makes it up can make it down. That is not how mountains work. No, I agreed, it isn't. She reached into the deerskin at her wrist and took something out and put it in my hand and closed my fingers over it before I could see. Then she stepped back. Do not look until you are down, she said, if you are down. I got Pilgrim turned. I got myself pointed at the long white slope and the days between me and my empty cabin and my tin and my dead wife's silent bell. I didn't say goodbye. I couldn't have got it out. I lifted my hand, and she lifted hers, the one that had held mine through the fever and never once spoke of it, and I started down. I didn't look back. She told me once not to look back, and I'd learned to do what she said. I made it down. My heart stuttered on the low switchbacks, and once I had to lie in the snow a full hour waiting for it to right itself, and I thought that was the end, and it wasn't, and I got up and went on, because I'd learned that too, that you get up and go on, from a girl who'd done it shot through the hip on the run from a thing worse than any wound. I made it back to the cabin 9 days after I'd left it. The bell was on the doorpost where Martha hung it. The tin was on the mantel where I'd left it. I built up the fire. I sat down in the rocker. And I opened my hand. She'd given me a button. One of mine from my own tin. She must have taken it that 3rd day, when she held them up to the light and gave them so carefully back. She'd taken one. My boy's, the smaller one. She'd carried it 6 days up the mountain, and she'd given it back to me at the edge of her valley and told me not to look until I was down. And I understood what she was telling me, the way she'd told me everything, without saying it straight. She was telling me I'd carried her, and now she'd carried a piece of mine, and that was the whole of it, that the dead you keep in a box you can hold aren't really gone if somebody else will help you carry them, that I didn't have to do it alone, that I never had. I put the button back in the tin. I put the carved bone the old man gave me in beside it, And then I did a thing I had not done in 19 years. I took a button off my own coat, a plain brass button off the coat I stood in, and I put it in the tin too. Not for a dead person. For a living one, days up the mountain, home at last in a valley with a spring that never freezes. So I'd have carried something of hers, the way she carried something of mine. So that on the far winter day when somebody finds this tin and doesn't understand it, one of the buttons in it will have belonged to a person who lived. I keep the bell on the doorpost. I keep meaning to take it down. I never will. Some nights, when the wind gets its voice up and starts telling me its lies, I sit by the fire with the tin in my lap, and I think about a shape in the snow that shouldn't have been alive, and a walk I shouldn't have survived, and the girl who taught an old man the thing he'd got exactly backward for 19 years. The taking was never the tragedy. It was the not carrying anyone worth the